Dear listeners, I welcome you to my channel. If you like my work, please subscribe to the channel, like this video and write a comment. This helps the video to promote and motivates you to try harder every day. If you want to support the channel financially, the link is in the description and in the profile header. Thank you. Enjoy listening. Dr. Edward Crane stood at the entrance of his newly opened dental clinic, the brass sign gleaming in the dim afternoon light. Crane Dental Care, where your smile is eternal. The tagline was meant to be reassuring, comforting even, but to those who truly knew him, it carried a far more sinister undertone. The town of Ravenbrook was small, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills. A place where everyone knew everyone, or at least, they thought they did. Edward had chosen this location precisely because of its quiet nature. Its remoteness allowed for certain liberties. He had spent years perfecting his craft, training under the best in cosmetic dentistry, but his obsession ran deeper than mere aesthetics. Perfection, he believed, was attainable, but only if one was willing to go beyond the conventional. His clinic, pristine and state-of-the-art, stood among the older buildings that lined the town's main street. The interior was immaculate, white walls, gleaming floors, and the subtle hum of machinery that filled the air like a mechanical heartbeat. His receptionist, a timid young woman named Claire, sat dutifully behind the front desk, her fingers nervously skimming the edges of the appointment book. "Doctor, your first patient is here," she murmured, not meeting his gaze. Edward turned, his face breaking into a smile so perfect it was almost unsettling. "Send them in." A middle-aged woman named Martha Whitmore walked in, her expression a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. She had heard about the new dentist in town, everyone had. His credentials were impeccable, and his charm was undeniable. Yet, there was something about him that made her uneasy. She couldn't quite place it. Edward guided her to the dental chair with practiced ease, the leather cool against her skin. As he adjusted the overhead light, his gloved fingers brushed against her jawline ever so slightly, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Relax, Mrs. Whitmore," he said soothingly. "This won't hurt a bit." As the examination began, Edward leaned in closer, his breath barely audible over the hum of the instruments. His eyes, a piercing shade of ice blue, studied her teeth with an intensity that felt almost unnatural. "You have wonderful dental structure," he commented, his voice velvety smooth. "Just a few minor adjustments, and your smile could be perfect." Martha swallowed, something in his tone making her stomach twist. "Oh, I think my teeth are just fine. I only came in for a routine cleaning." Edward chuckled, the sound oddly hollow. Of course. Let's begin." As he worked, his hands were meticulous, movements precise and deliberate. He hummed softly, a tune unfamiliar yet eerily melodic. When the cleaning was done, he handed her a mirror. "See? Good as new. But if you ever want to improve upon nature's design, I can make arrangements." Martha forced a smile, eager to leave. "Thank you, Dr. Crane. I'll keep that in mind." She hurried out of the clinic, an unshakable feeling of dread settling in her bones. She would later tell her husband that something about the new dentist felt wrong, but she wouldn't be able to explain why. Back inside, Edward watched from the window as she walked briskly down the street. His smile never faltered. He turned, his gaze drifting towards the locked door at the back of the clinic. The door that led to his personal workspace. The place where true perfection was crafted. And where some smiles never faded, no matter what. A week had passed since the opening of Crane Dental Care, and already Dr. Edward Crane had become the talk of Ravenbrook. His flawless techniques, his unnervingly perfect smile, and his ability to make even the most nervous patients feel at ease, at least temporarily, had cemented his reputation as a top-tier dentist. Yet, among the whispers of admiration, there were quieter murmurs, ones that spoke of something amiss. Martha Whitmore had not returned to town since her appointment. At first, her absence was barely noticed. She was known to visit her sister in a neighboring city from time to time. But when the days turned to a week, and then nearly 2, her husband began asking around. Had anyone seen her? Did she mention going somewhere? No one had an answer. The last place she had been seen was Crane Dental Care. Edward, of course, denied any knowledge of her whereabouts when questioned. She left in perfect health, he assured Mr. Whitmore with his signature smile. Perhaps she just needed a change of scenery. That explanation seemed to suffice, for now. But Martha wasn't the only one who had vanished. A young man named Daniel Mercer had scheduled a follow-up appointment 2 days after his first visit. He never showed up. Calls to his home went unanswered. His landlord, puzzled, noted that Daniel's rent had not been paid, and his apartment was left untouched, as if he had simply walked out one day and never returned. Then there was Evelyn Grayson, a quiet schoolteacher who had mentioned to a colleague that she was going in for a whitening treatment at Crane Dental Care. She was never seen at work again. Her car was still parked in her driveway, her mail beginning to pile up. A missing person report was filed, but in small towns like Ravenbrook, the authorities were slow to act. People leave, they said. Maybe she had her reasons. But not everyone was convinced. Laura Marks, a local journalist for the Ravenbrook Gazette, had been following these disappearances with growing concern. The connections were too strong to ignore. She sat at her desk late one evening, scanning her notes. All 3 missing individuals had last been seen at Crane's clinic. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard before she made a decision. She would schedule an appointment herself. The next morning, she called the clinic. Claire, the receptionist, answered in her usual meek tone. Crane Dental Care, how can I help you? Hi, I'd like to schedule a cleaning, Laura said, forcing cheer into her voice. There was a pause. Dr. Crane is booked for the week, but we have an opening next Monday. Would that work? Perfect, Laura replied, noting the time. See you then. As she hung up, a chill ran down her spine. There was something in Claire's voice, hesitation, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Laura didn't know what she would find when she stepped into that clinic, but she was determined to uncover the truth. After all, patients shouldn't simply disappear after visiting the dentist. And if Dr. Crane was hiding something, she would make sure the world knew. The night before her appointment, Laura Marks sat in her dimly lit apartment, going through her notes for the 100th time. 3 people missing. All last seen at Crane Dental Care. No formal accusations, no evidence, only suspicions. She had investigated plenty of strange cases before, but this one unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Something about Dr. Edward Crane felt wrong, like an actor playing a role too perfectly, hiding his true face behind that unnervingly flawless smile. She closed her notebook and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, she would be sitting in his chair. Laura arrived at the clinic at exactly 3 p.m. The waiting room was pristine, with soft instrumental music humming in the background. Claire, the receptionist, looked up and offered a weak smile, but her hands trembled as she typed Laura's information into the system. Dr. Crane will see you now, Claire said quietly. Laura stepped into the examination room, her heart pounding. The walls were unnaturally white, the air thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic. A single cabinet stood against the wall, its doors locked. Edward Crane entered with the same easy grace she had seen in all his public appearances. His smile was perfect, too perfect. Miss Marks, he said smoothly. Welcome. You have excellent teeth, I must say. A true journalist's smile. Let's keep it that way, shall we? Laura forced a chuckle as she settled into the chair. Just a routine cleaning. Crane nodded, preparing his tools. As he leaned over her, she felt a wave of unease. His movements were precise, his touch feather-light, but his eyes, cold and calculating, studied her as if she were a specimen under a microscope. Then came the sound. A low, muffled whisper. Laura stiffened. It was faint, but unmistakable, coming from below. From the basement. Did you hear that? She asked, trying to keep her voice even. Crane's smile never wavered. Hear what? The whispering grew slightly louder, a garbled murmur, followed by a soft scratching noise. Laura's pulse quickened. That, she said. It's coming from downstairs. Crane set down his tool and straightened. "Ah," he said, his tone light. "Pipes, I'm afraid. This building is older than it looks." Laura forced a nod, though every instinct in her screamed that he was lying. When the cleaning was finished, she stepped out of the chair, her mind racing. She needed to get into that basement. As Crane walked her to the reception desk, Laura caught a glimpse of a door at the end of the hallway. It was locked, but something about it sent a chill down her spine. She left the clinic with a smile on her face, but inside, she knew one thing for certain: she had to return. And next time, she wouldn't be coming as a patient. Edward Crane sat alone in his dimly lit office, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above casting eerie shadows across his meticulously organized desk. His gloved fingers traced the edges of a small, framed photograph, an old, faded image of a young boy with crooked teeth, his lips stretched into an unnatural grin. The boy was him, years ago, before he understood the importance of perfection. He closed his eyes, allowing the memories to surface. The taunts, the laughter, the cruelty of children who saw his flaws as entertainment. But worst of all was the dentist his parents had sent him to, Dr. Bellamy, a man with cold hands and an obsession of his own. "A smile defines a person," Bellamy would whisper as he worked, his tools gleaming under the surgical light. "And you, Edward, will learn to appreciate perfection." Crane's jaw tightened at the memory. The pain had been unbearable, the procedures relentless. Teeth extracted, realigned, reshaped. Hours upon hours in the chair, his mouth stretched open as metal and ceramic replaced nature's imperfections. By the time Dr. Bellamy was done, Edward was unrecognizable. A perfect smile, yes, but at what cost? That was when the obsession began. Crane stood and crossed the room to a hidden cabinet. He unlocked it with a key that dangled from a chain around his neck. Inside, rows of plaster molds lined the shelves, casts of every patient he had ever deemed worthy of improvement. Some were flawless replicas, their teeth sculpted to an inhuman level of symmetry. Others were failures, shattered and discarded, reminders of those who had resisted his vision. His fingers stopped on a newer addition, Martha Whitmore. A fine specimen. He had been careful with her, so very careful. But she had resisted in the end, her screams muffled behind the thick walls of his basement. He traced the curve of the plaster teeth, admiration flickering in his cold blue eyes. Perfection, after all, required sacrifice. Across town, Laura Marks sat at her desk, replaying the events of her visit to the clinic. The whispers, the locked basement door, the way Claire's hands had trembled when she booked the appointment. She opened her laptop and pulled up her notes, cross-referencing the missing persons cases with Crane's patient list. The overlap was undeniable. Every single one of them had visited his clinic before vanishing. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She needed proof, real proof, not just speculation. And there was only one way to get it. She had to go back. But this time, she wouldn't be walking through the front door. Laura Marks stood outside Crane Dental Care, her breath slow and measured as she prepared herself for what she was about to do. The evening sky had begun to darken, the last remnants of daylight casting long shadows along the quiet street. The clinic was still open, though the waiting room inside appeared empty. She had timed this visit perfectly. With a deep breath, she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. Claire, the receptionist, looked up immediately. The young woman's pale face tense with recognition, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if uncertain whether to proceed with the check-in. "Miss Marks," Claire said hesitantly. I didn't think you had another appointment scheduled." Laura forced a smile, knowing she had to tread carefully. "I don't, but I had some concerns after my last visit. I was hoping to speak with Dr. Crane again." Before Claire could respond, the door to the examination room opened and Edward Crane himself stepped out. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Laura's with a look of mild surprise, followed quickly by something more calculated. "Miss Marks," he greeted, his smooth voice unsettling in its practiced calm. "What a pleasant surprise. Is something the matter?" Laura hesitated, feigning uncertainty. "I've been having some discomfort since my cleaning. Thought maybe you could take a quick look." Crane studied her for a moment before offering his signature, flawless smile. Of course. Please, come in. She followed him into the examination room, her heart pounding. As the door shut behind her, she took in every detail: the locked cabinet in the corner, the gleaming tray of instruments, the small hallway leading to the back of the clinic. And, most importantly, the door she suspected led to the basement. Go ahead and take a seat, Crane instructed, adjusting his gloves. Where exactly are you feeling discomfort? Laura hesitated, her mind racing for an excuse. Mostly along my gums. Some sensitivity. It just feels different. Crane nodded and reached for his instruments. Let's have a look, then. As he leaned in, she felt the same overwhelming sense of unease as before. His presence was too precise, too controlled. The way he handled his tools was not just careful, but almost reverent. She suppressed a shudder as his gloved fingers grazed her lips, adjusting her mouth just so. But then, the whispering came again. Muffled, distant, but unmistakable. A voice, or voices, barely audible beneath the hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights. Laura's body tensed. This time, she was certain she wasn't imagining it. Crane paused, his hand still for just a second too long before he resumed his examination as if nothing was wrong. You're experiencing minor irritation, but nothing abnormal, he said, withdrawing his tools. I can prescribe a mild rinse if you'd like. Laura sat up, doing her best to keep her voice even. That sounds good. By the way, do you have a basement here? I thought I heard something coming from below. For the first time, Crane's smile faltered, so quickly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Laura did. His gaze remained fixed on her for just a beat too long before he exhaled a small, amused chuckle. Pipes, he said smoothly, his mask of calm returning. Old buildings like this have all kinds of strange noises. I assure you, nothing to worry about. Laura forced a polite nod, but her instinct screamed at her. He was lying. As she left the clinic, she glanced once more at Claire, who was staring at her with wide, desperate eyes that seemed to beg her not to come back. Laura walked out into the cool night air, her hands clenched at her sides. She needed to get into that basement. And she had no doubt that whatever she found there would change everything. Laura Marks sat in her apartment, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. The facts were there, all pointing to something sinister lurking beneath the pristine walls of Crane Dental Care. The whispers, the locked basement door, the missing patients, everything was too perfectly hidden, too carefully controlled. But what could she do? Walk into the police station with nothing more than a gut feeling and scattered disappearances that no one else seemed eager to connect? No. If she wanted the truth, she needed to go back. And this time, she wouldn't be leaving until she had proof. It was nearly midnight when Laura found herself standing outside the clinic again, dressed in dark clothes, her heart pounding so loudly she swore she could hear it echo against the empty street. The town of Ravenbrook slept behind her, unaware of the secrets buried beneath its surface. She had studied the building's layout all evening, searching for vulnerabilities. The front door was locked tight, but there was a back entrance, a supply door leading to the storage room. If she could get inside, she could make her way down to the basement. Taking a steadying breath, she pulled a set of lockpicks from her pocket. She had learned a few tricks over the years as a journalist, though she had never broken into a place quite like this. The first pick slid into the keyhole, and after a tense few moments, she felt the satisfying click of the lock giving way. She was in. The clinic was eerily silent, the air thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant. The examination rooms stood empty, their chairs still gleaming under the dim emergency lights. Everything was in perfect order, too perfect. Laura crept down the hallway, her pulse quickening as she reached the door at the end. The basement. It was locked, of course, but she had expected that. She knelt, working quickly, and after a few agonizing seconds, the lock gave way with a quiet snap. She hesitated. Beyond this door lay the answer she had been searching for. She pushed it open. A narrow staircase stretched downward, vanishing into darkness. The air that wafted up carried a faint, metallic scent, She pulled a small flashlight from her bag and descended, one step at a time, the wood creaking beneath her weight. At the bottom, she found herself in a large, dimly lit space. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dental supplies, but her eyes were drawn to the far end of the room where something much darker lurked. A series of glass cases stood in a row, each containing something that made her stomach lurch. Teeth. Hundreds of them were arranged meticulously on velvet-lined trays. Some were pristine, polished to a gleaming white. Others were stained, cracked, failures, perhaps. Next to them, plaster molds sat on pedestals, each labeled with a name. Martha Whitmore, Daniel Mercer, Evelyn Grayson, the missing people. Laura's breath caught in her throat. He had been keeping them, pieces of them. Trophies. She turned, intending to bolt back up the stairs, when she saw something else. A steel door, slightly ajar. And from inside, a whisper. Someone was still down here. Swallowing her fear, she stepped forward, pressing her palm against the cold metal. She pushed it open. The sight before her sent ice through her veins. A woman sat in the corner of a dimly lit room, her wrists bound, her face gaunt with exhaustion. But when she looked up, hope flickered in her wide eyes. "Help me," she whispered. Laura didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, working at the restraints, her hands shaking. "I'm getting you out of here." "What's your name?" "Claire," the woman breathed. Claire, the receptionist. Laura's heart lurched. The same woman who had booked her appointment, who had looked at her with silent warning. "We have to go," Claire urged. "Before he comes back." Laura grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door, her mind racing. They had the proof. They could end this nightmare. But just as they reached the stairs, a shadow loomed above them. And Dr. Edward Crane smiled. Laura's breath hitched in her throat as she locked eyes with Dr. Edward Crane. He stood at the top of the staircase, blocking their only way out. The dim overhead light cast eerie shadows across his face, accentuating the unnatural perfection of his smile. Claire trembled beside her, gripping Laura's arm as if letting go would mean certain death. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Marks." Crane's voice was calm, measured, like a disappointed father scolding a reckless child. "This is a private area." Laura squared her shoulders, forcing herself to stand tall despite the terror clawing at her insides. "Private?" she shot back. "Is that what you call a basement full of human teeth?" Crane let out a soft sigh, shaking his head as though she had completely misunderstood. "You journalists," he mused, taking slow, deliberate steps downward. "Always so quick to assign malice where there is only art." Laura clenched her jaw. "Art? You tortured people. You kept them here." His expression didn't change. If anything, his smile grew wider, more unnatural. "I perfected them," he corrected. "I gave them something they never had before, true beauty. Flawless symmetry. Do you have any idea how many people go through life never knowing what it's like to have the perfect smile?" Claire whimpered beside her. "You're insane." Crane sighed again, this time with something resembling pity. "Claire, my dear, I always knew you lacked vision." He reached into the pocket of his pristine white coat and pulled out something small, a syringe, its tip glinting under the dim light. Laura's blood turned to ice. "You both need to calm down," he said, taking another step closer. "I never intended for you to see this, Laura. But now that you have, I can't let you leave." Adrenaline surged through Laura's veins. She tightened her grip on Claire's wrist. "Run." Before Crane could react, she shoved Claire toward the door and lunged at him, knocking the syringe from his grasp. It clattered to the floor as he stumbled back, his composure breaking for the first time. Laura wasted no time. She grabbed Claire's hand and bolted up the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. They burst into the hallway, sprinting past examination rooms and sterile counters. Behind them, Crane's footsteps pounded against the floor, his breath eerily steady even in pursuit. They reached the front of the clinic. The glass door loomed ahead, freedom just within reach. Then, a sharp pain exploded in Laura's shoulder. She cried out, stumbling as white-hot agony spread through her arm. Claire screamed. She turned her head just in time to see Crane standing a few feet away, holding another syringe, this one embedded in her shoulder. "No," she gasped, her vision blurring. "No." Her limbs grew heavy. Her knees buckled. Claire's voice became a distant echo, and the world around her tilted into darkness. The last thing she saw was Crane's perfect, horrifying smile. A dull, throbbing ache pulsed through Laura's skull as she drifted back into consciousness. The darkness around her felt suffocating, heavy, as though the air itself pressed against her skin. Her limbs were sluggish, unresponsive, as if she were trapped in a body that no longer belonged to her. Panic clawed its way into her chest as she struggled to move, to understand where she was. The last thing she remembered was running with Claire toward the clinic doors, the glimmer of hope just within reach before the sharp sting in her shoulder had sent her spiraling into oblivion. Now, she was here. Wherever here was. The scent of antiseptic and something more acrid filled her nostrils. The unmistakable hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, though their glow was absent. The floor beneath her was cold, smooth tile, maybe? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to take a steady breath. Then, she heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Slow. Calculated. She wasn't alone. Her body tensed as footsteps echoed through the space, moving closer. She forced her eyes open, blinking away the haze. The room was dimly lit now, a single surgical lamp casting a circle of sterile white over a steel tray filled with instruments. Sharp, gleaming instruments. A voice broke the silence. "Ah, you're awake." Laura's breath hitched. Dr. Edward Crane stood just beyond the light, his expression unreadable in the shadows. But his voice, that same measured, soothing tone, sent a fresh wave of fear through her veins. "I was beginning to worry," he continued, stepping into view. He was still wearing his white coat, pristine as ever, though now his sleeves were rolled up. "The dosage was strong, but I needed you lucid for this next part." Laura tried to move, but something restrained her. Leather straps dug into her wrists and ankles, binding her to the reclining chair. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice hoarse. Crane sighed, shaking his head. Laura, why must you resist? I had such high hopes for you. A woman of intelligence, of curiosity. And yet, here you are, wasting all that potential on fear." He reached for the tray, his fingers grazing a pair of forceps. He held them up, studying them with almost reverent appreciation. "You see, most people fail to understand the true power of a smile. It's more than just an expression. It's identity. It's control." Laura clenched her fists. "You're sick." Crane let out a soft chuckle, as if amused by her defiance. "No, my dear. I'm enlightened." Her pulse roared in her ears as he turned his gaze back to her, stepping closer. "And soon, you will be too." A new sound cut through the air. A door creaking open. Dr. Crane, a trembling voice echoed from the entrance. "Claire." Crane's expression darkened. "You should not be here." Laura twisted against the restraints, desperation surging through her. "Claire, run." But Claire didn't run. Instead, she held something in her shaking hands. Something small. Something metallic. A scalpel. Before Crane could react, Claire lunged. The moment Claire lunged, time seemed to fracture into sharp, chaotic pieces. The glint of the scalpel caught the harsh surgical light as it arced through the air, aimed directly at Dr. Edward Crane. He moved fast, faster than Laura thought possible, dodging just enough that the blade only grazed his arm. Crane hissed through clenched teeth, his perfect smile faltering as a thin line of red bloomed against the pristine white of his coat. His eyes darkened, no longer the calm, composed doctor, but something else, something unhinged. Claire didn't hesitate. She swung again, this time aiming for his face. Crane ducked, knocking over the tray of instruments as he twisted away. The tools clattered onto the floor in a discordant symphony of metal against tile. Claire staggered, thrown off balance, and before she could react, Crane struck. With terrifying precision, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully until the scalpel slipped from her fingers. It hit the ground with a soft clink, spinning uselessly away. "You never did understand, Claire," Crane murmured, tightening his grip as she whimpered. "I wanted to help you. I wanted to make you beautiful. And yet, you chose this path." "Go to hell," she spat, struggling against him. Laura, still strapped to the chair, felt helpless rage surge through her. She couldn't just watch, she had to do something. She twisted her wrists, ignoring the bite of the leather restraints against her skin. The buckle on one of the straps was loose, just loose enough. As Crane wrestled with Claire, Laura yanked her arm free. Her hand darted to the nearest tool within reach, a dental drill that had fallen to the floor. With a desperate yell, she swung it upward, jamming the spinning bit into Crane's shoulder. He screamed, a sound unlike anything she had heard from him before, a raw, primal howl. The scent of burning flesh filled the air as the drill bit sank into muscle. His grip on Claire faltered, and she wrenched herself free, stumbling backward. Laura didn't wait. She reached for the straps on her legs, frantically undoing them. Claire, regaining her composure, grabbed a pair of pliers from the ground and swung them at Crane, catching him across the jaw. He reeled, clutching his face, his perfect smile now marred with blood. "Run!" Laura shouted, finally breaking free. They bolted for the door, their feet pounding against the cold tile. Behind them, Crane groaned, staggering but not down. "You can't run from perfection," he bellowed after them, his voice echoing through the basement. Laura didn't look back. She and Claire burst into the darkened hallway, their breaths ragged as they sprinted for the exit. The clinic was eerily silent, the horrors of the basement feeling like they had bled into every corner of the building. The front door loomed ahead. Freedom. Then, the sound of footsteps. Heavy, relentless. He was coming. Claire fumbled with the lock, her fingers slick with sweat. Come on. Laura turned, her chest heaving. Crane was there, emerging from the shadows like a specter. His white coat was stained with blood, his perfect composure shattered. Yet, despite it all, that smile remained. "You don't understand what you're ruining," he said, almost mournfully. "I could have made you perfect." The lock clicked. The door burst open. They didn't hesitate. The night air hit them like a tidal wave as they stumbled onto the street. The cold wind carried away the sterile scent of the clinic, replacing it with something real, something alive. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had heard the struggle. Someone had called for help. Crane stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not rage. Not arrogance. But something close to regret. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the darkness of his clinic. Laura and Claire didn't stop running until the flashing lights of the approaching police cars filled the night.